Well, there's lots to talk about. I wanted to bring up first, though, I thought the worst decision of the weekend, and sometimes we don't talk about the so-called smaller teams, but where Watford were 1-0 up when Sissoko went through at Brentford, and the lad got a yellow, and I was watching it at home, decided to pause it and become the VAR man myself. How he didn't get sent off, he's in. At 1-0, he's in. They should be down to 10 men. He's in one-on-one to make it 2-0. It was an awful decision.
Defender's on the cover, though, isn't he?
Not when you pause it. He's behind him. He's well behind. He's in. He's in one-on-one. That's why I paused it 64 times. Otherwise, I wouldn't be coming on here and having this concise opinion.
So you think they should have been sent off?
Ridiculous decision. Well, 100%, not 90, 100%. It was. Watford should have been fuming because it's an awful decision. But in terms of the penalties, I thought so many of them were 50-50. The one, probably the most obvious mistake I thought was the City one. That was really harsh, and I think the Leeds one in the last minute. I mean, if we're trying to move forward to stop players going down so easily and keep the game flowing, I know Click shouldn't have stuck his foot out, but he didn't touch him enough for him to go down like that. That wasn't a pen for me either. It sounds like a Liverpool fan saying Chelsea and City shouldn't have won, but I'm just being honest about what I saw. I thought that last one on Rudiger was really, really soft. I'd be fuming if I was a Leeds player. I can understand why it was kicking off at the end.
Simon, do you think that there is a possibility that there's a big team bias in the fact that Chelsea and Manchester City got over the line because of these big decisions, or is that just too simplistic? Because Dean Smith said during the game, or spoke to me after the game against Manchester United, and he said it was a typical Manchester United penalty that won them the game down at Carrot Road.
Yeah, but that excuses the defender for making a ridiculous decision to put himself in a way of a call. I mean, the argument that big teams get more bias might flow if they're playing at home. And not clearly Man United weren't, but you're talking about teams, and Man United might be the exception in these circumstances because Norwich were very unlucky, but they tend to attack more, so they tend to put the referees to more questions, and the more questions, it's like a war of attrition with some referees, the more questions you ask them, eventually you're going to get an affirmative. And if the narrative has changed, because we've spent years and years and years and years pillaring referees about their on-field decisions. And then for the last 2 years, because VAR's been involved, people have been saying, why don't referees make on-field decisions? Because we've beaten them up so much that VAR became an alternative resource for them. Now VAR's changed its directive and said, actually, we want to stay with the referee's decision as much as we possibly can, which was the original position before VAR come in. So what we're going to do is, if there's a balance of doubt, if it's not beyond reasonable doubt, we're going to stay with the on-field decision. And if your team is more offensive and you're on the attack all the time, then you're going to ask more questions. If you're playing at home and you're the bigger club, you're going to ask more questions via the crowd, and referees are human beings. So I look at those decisions and say, the Manchester City decision is just a poor decision. It's a poor decision by VAR, but it's not clear and obvious because there's a call to be made on the pitch and they haven't overturned it. United is a penalty because the guy's pulled him to the ground. How much contact we have? He has his hands round Ronaldo's neck because he's got the wrong side of him. Why would you defend that way? And Dean Smith can sit there and and get upset about it, but he should be more upset about the ridiculous defending from Max Aarons.
Just on the human nature element, with referees, it happened for years, and I still think it happens now because the referees are also VAR. They mix it up, their jobs, don't they? So
sure. You
can be the VAR studio one week and then manage referee in Liverpool, Manchester United the next week, and you have to be around the likes of Klopp, Guardiola, whoever it may be. So I do think, of course, there's an element of big team bias because of the huge scrutiny on these teams. We have, they're more important. They're more.
They're more scrutinised, isn't it? More important.
Yeah, sorry, more scrutinised. So I do think that comes into play, but it shouldn't be the way, should it? Now we've got VAR, it should just be, and you'll never get anybody coming out and speaking about it because they always think they're impartial and they're trying to be. But there is that thing, and Fergie did it for years, didn't he? Terrified referees for years when they were going to Old Trafford.
But irrespective of whether you work in the studio one week at Stockley Park and you work on the pitch the other, you're not being screamed at by 30,000 or 50,000 people or a bunch of players surrounding you by sitting in the VAR room. You have a different dynamic of a different pressure. In real time, at that moment in time, you're using your professional judgment. You're using all of the factors around you to make a decision. And each one of those penalties has an element of doubt about it, which means that the VAR guys, whose narrative is now, is unless it's beyond a reasonable doubt or clear and present, then we leave it with the on-field decision.
Yeah. So
what's the element of doubt about the João Moutinho handball?
Because if you look at the ridiculous rules that were brought up on television by IFAB about where the green zone was and so on and so forth, there is an element of in real time looking at it and going, well, we couldn't get an angle, is what VAR said. And I know Lineker and his little smug crew talked about the fact that we could get an
I'm
angle.
one of the smug crew.
Yeah, oh, you were there, of course. Yeah, that's
I wasn't
what I mentioned.
there, but I am a smug.
But one of those, we're talking about the dynamics of how they could see it. But there is this element, it's not beyond reasonable doubt. And we're getting into the territory where VAR now is almost abdicating its responsibility because the pile-on has been, let's let referees let
come
the
on,
game
Simon,
flow.
there's also a bit with the VARs. They don't want to overturn a decision that's been made by one of their mates because they know they're going to be in that situation the next week. And that was the situation at Leicester yesterday. The game at Leicester yesterday, there was a penalty that was given for James Maddison. It should never have been given.
No, it shouldn't have been. And do you think that's true, though, Sam, what you just said about
but it's a conspiracy
protecting
theory,
each
isn't
other
it?
a little bit?
Danny Kelly said that for a year ago, about 18 months ago, suggested that they all club together, and I think that's just nonsense. I think that's the media never having refereed a game, never having really sat in Stockley Park and understand how it all works, suggesting that because the outcomes aren't quite perfect in this imperfect world that we live in, let's put a narrative to that called a conspiracy theory that they all club together.
See, I don't think the officials are that arrogant that they mind being overturned if it's overruled if it's the wrong decision. I'd like to think that we've come further forward than that. I think it's just a simple case sometimes of, not interpreting the rules how we think, or not having played the game and not sticking to the fact that, we don't want players going down easily and getting away with murder.
Did you
in
think
the
Salah
box.
was a stonewall penalty?
Because
I didn't when I watched it.
It looked a pen. And when I think it's a pen just about, but it's
just about.
He slipped, didn't he?
He engendered the contact, though, didn't he? He moved across the defender in order to put his body in between ball and man.
Yeah. So that I would think the majority of refs would give that pen.
But in your mind's eye, is that a stonewall penalty? Because forward sitting on match of the
whether
day,
he gave it, didn't he?
He
So that
gave
was
it.
never being overturned,
right?
And I think likewise the other end, the Villa one, could have been given.
But you're
if
saying
if the Villa one was given, they wouldn't have overturned it.
But you're saying the same thing. Rudiger gets a kick from behind.
It wasn't a kick. It was a touch.
Well, okay.
There's a difference between when your legs across someone with momentum running into your back and you go over, even though sometimes they're going over.
So why didn't they overturn that one then?
Just a lack of understanding. They don't
it's contact.
Don't get the game.
But
no, Simon, contact doesn't mean a pen. So we've got to get away from that rule.
But it does, though, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't.
And they said that at the beginning of the season, they didn't want soft penalties, and contact doesn't always involve a consequence of giving a penalty.
Right. So, correct. That, to me, when I watch football, that he never, ever... You can still buy his movement, Rudiger. I mean, he had a great game, by the way. But he went down so extravagantly compared to the touch. The touch was a little poke prod trying to get the ball. Sam, you've seen the game. Come on. I know you're a Chelsea man, but that was a shame that the game soft to say the least, and if we're going to give pens for that, I don't want to see that, because we'll be given 5-6 penalties every week, won't we? We'll be discussing this every weekend. It was a poor decision.
Not the most controversial thing that happened this weekend, I'm sure, and I reckon we'll probably get some Everton fans who want to have their say about their defeat this weekend to Crystal Palace. Another defeat for Rafa Benitez just after they seem to be turning it around.
Jim White and Simon Jordan, Monday to Thursday morning, 10 till 1. On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.